Okay, so not too long ago I ranked all of the attack type jutsu in Shinobi Striker, and today we're going to be continuing with that series, looking at every jutsu in the range class. There's almost 40 techniques to get through, so let's not waste any more time and get into it. Coming in last is once again a summoning jutsu, this time summoning Salamander. I don't know if it's just me who finds most of these summoning jutsus absolutely useless or if everyone is in agreement on this. Nonetheless, I just think this jutsu is incredibly inconvenient, as it takes a while for you to summon the Salamander, not to mention you have to be on even ground to do so. I guess it could be used to protect objectives, but there are much better ways to do that than this. Next up on our list we have fire style flame bombs. This is a very simple fire projectile that allows you to actually use the jutsu twice in a row without having to wait for the cooldown. That being said, it deals really low damage of around 10%, and even though the cooldown is incredibly low, only being 7 seconds, it still isn't really enough to justify the use of this jutsu in my opinion. Up next we have another very similar jutsu to our last entry, that being fire style Phoenix Flowers. This ninjutsu once again deals low damage, clocking in around 20% of the enemy's total health. The cooldown is a little longer at 10 seconds, but this jutsu also additionally disables the enemy's sub for 7 seconds, which is a pretty big benefit in my mind. Not only that, but the tracking is also pretty good, making it a bit easier to land. Coming down the list we have fire style Phoenix Flame Scarlet Claw. Honestly, I wouldn't blame you for thinking this and the previous jutsu are the exact same, as they almost are, with Scarlet Claw being a bit faster and giving the enemy a reduction in attack power for the next 5 seconds. Moving down we have the Lighting Shuriken Net Jutsu. This technique makes you perform a couple of hand signs and then fire off a lighting beam at the opponent, stunning them for 5 seconds. It can feel a bit clumsy at the start as the activation time isn't instant, but once you get used to it, it can be a decent stun. The range is good, but don't expect to hit any moving targets with it, as it just travels in a straight line. Continuing on is Ice Style Icicle Swallow, which makes you throw out 5 icicles that deal a bit of damage and then stun the enemy for 5 seconds if they hit. The stun is nice, but the main problem with this jutsu is the fact that there's no tracking whatsoever, meaning that it can sometimes feel a bit up to chance if the icicles will connect. Not to mention, the backflip you do while performing the jutsu can be a bit annoying and inconvenient. Next up is definitely the best base game fire style technique, that being the original Fireball Jutsu. This is just a better version of flame bombs. It's bigger, deals more damage, has better tracking, and even though the cooldown is also larger, it's definitely much more reliable of a jutsu to use in the midst of a battle, as you don't need to use it twice to deal substantial damage. Following up on the list is Amatarasu. This eye technique creates black flames at the target's feet, dealing damage if it connects and continually burning them for the next 10 seconds. This jutsu is really good if you manage to land it, but that is unfortunately its biggest downside, as trying to hit a moving target is nearly impossible, meaning you'll have to reserve this jutsu on enemies that are mostly stationary. Coming down we have one of the most iconic jutsus in the series, Chidori. Chidori makes you charge a blighting chakra and launch at your opponent, dealing decent damage. It has a pretty low cooldown and can be used as a great movement tool in something like flag battle. The range on it also isn't bad for a close range jutsu, making it still a decent choice to this day. Hey, so before we continue, I would just like to ask you quickly if you could maybe consider to subscribe if you're enjoying the video so far. We're trying to get to 500 subscribers and I could really use your help. I will be doing the same type of video on both the defense and heal class, so if you don't want to miss them, then subscribing is the best way to ensure that. Anyway, thank you so much and let's move on to our next entry. Moving down the list we have Angelic Advent, which is a jutsu that just quite literally gives you the ability to fly with wings made out of paper. It's a great jutsu for moving around the map, as you keep the wings for quite a while. That being said, your only option of attack is to throw out kunai at the opponent while in the air, which while being okay for supporting your allies, won't deal much damage. The jutsu also leaves you quite open, if anyone can get to you that is. Okay, let's move on to our next entry, Hidden Jutsu 1000 Needles of Death. This jutsu makes you place a small puddle on the ground, which if stepped on, freezes the enemy and explodes around them, damaging them with multiple icicles. This is a good technique for defending objectives and can be well combined with something like Heavenly Hand Power. Outside of that, it falls a bit flat. Thankfully, its low cooldown means that you can place it quite often in a game. Up next is Super B Squirrel Lion, which makes you create 4 ink lions that charge at the enemy, dealing around 20% damage in total, while also lowering the opponent's movement speed for the next 8 seconds. This is still one of the fastest projectiles jutsus in the game, making it very easy to hit enemies with it, since it also has really good tracking. The damage isn't anything amazing, but it's perfect for enemies who are low on health and who you just need to quickly finish off. Moving on, we have another super B Squirrel jutsu. This time we have the bird variation. It makes you create a big bird made out of ink that flies at the enemy, dealing 20% damage and covering their screen in black ink. Both of these jutsu are very similar. I just think that the screen covered ink is much more of a pain in the ass to deal with compared to the speed debuff, even though the jutsu does have a slightly bigger cooldown. Up next on our list is Shikigami Dance Shield. This jutsu makes you create a shield made out of paper that travels forward in the targeted enemy's direction, stunning them for 5 seconds if they get caught in it. This is one of the longest stunts in the game, not to mention it can stun multiple opponents and also has a very low cooldown. The only problem is that it's pretty difficult to hit sometimes, as the shield travels very slowly, meaning that you will most likely have to force the enemy to step into it if you want to stun them. Continuing on is Fire Style Hiding in Ash jutsu, which makes you bury yourself into the ground, similar to Kisami's jutsu, making you very fast and invulnerable, mostly that is. This is probably the best way in the game to escape deadly situations, while also being great for carrying the flag or contesting, and I mean only contesting bases, since you cannot capture them with this technique. Apart from that, it does stun enemies if you come out of the ground very close to them, but it doesn't happen too often. Next up on our list is Onyx Chidori, which is just a buffed version of the normal Chidori. It has a much shorter recovery time while also being quite a bit faster than the original. Added onto that fact is that it also disables the enemy's sub for a bit after the hit. All of this does come with the added cost of almost double the time in terms of the cooldown, which is the main reason it is a bit low on the list. I do still prefer it, but I can't place it any higher than this. Moving down the list, we have probably the only summoning jutsu in the game I'd consider using, C2 Dragon. This jutsu makes you create a dragon out of clay that spits out little clay bursts which attack the enemy and explode upon impact. Unlike other summonings, this one is actually viable, being pretty good at helping you with defending bases or other objectives. Moving further down the list, we have Water Style Water Dragon Jutsu. This jutsu makes you create a long water dragon that shoots out at the enemy, dealing 20% damage and also slowing down their movement speed for 5 seconds. This jutsu has one of the shortest activation times in the game, making it very versatile. That being said, the 14-second cooldown bumps it down a few spots for me personally. I just think it's a bit too long. Okay, continuing on, we have Multiple Striking Shadow Snake. This attack makes you stick out your left arm, which is covered in snakes, which then launch at the opponent, dealing around 20% damage and also poisoning them for another 10 seconds. This jutsu has both a short activation time and a low cooldown, added with the fact that the range on it is pretty good for a close range attack, and you have a decently reliable way to not only get damage in, but also poison your enemy. Moving on to our next entry, we have Summoning Blade Dance. This jutsu summons a weasel that goes after the enemy, dealing damage and placing a tornado around them if they hit. After 7 seconds, the weasel reappears and strikes the enemy down again, dealing further damage. This is a decent projectile with good tracking and pace. The activation time is a little too long for me though, it feels easily interrupted. But it is a good way to have a backup plan when going into a 1v1. Alright, following up is Inferno style Flame Control, which creates multiple blades made out of Amatarasu, which then target and trace the opponent, dealing damage on impact while also continually burning them after. This is basically like a moving Amaterasu that also deals more damage, and is in my opinion easier to hit, making it definitely a viable choice, especially considering the fact that it's a base game jutsu. Following on is Water Style Severing Wave, which makes you spray a thin ray of water from left to right, dealing 30% damage to any one hit. This jutsu has a potential to deal quite a lot of damage to multiple opponents if used at the right time, since it can cover quite an area in front of you. That being said, it's pretty easily dodged if you just jump over it, meaning it's best to use in team battles when the opponents are already occupied. Let's move down the list to our next spot, which is occupied by 1000 Hands. This jutsu transforms you into the third Hokage puppet, giving you flight in the process. If you press the jutsu button again, the puppet will perform a shoulder charge, followed by basically the same thing as Orochimaru's multiple snakes jutsu. Just this time you use the puppet hands instead of the snakes, but the damage and the poison are the same. This is basically just like that jutsu, just with the added utility, making it a bit better. Continuing on with our list is Heavenly Hand Power, which just simply makes you swap places with the targeted enemy. As cool as this jutsu is, it does have a limited number of situations where it is useful. Amazing for things like flag battle and base battle, less so for combat battle, even though you can still use it as a surprise factor. That being said, there's a lot of really cool combos with this jutsu, just like the one you're seeing me use with Haku's Puddle, which is why I love this jutsu. Okay, moving down the list we have Camoi Lighting Blade, which is just a lighting blade where you simultaneously activate Camoi, making you invulnerable for the duration of the attack. This is probably the best technique out of the Chidori-like jutsu out there. Not only does it deal a bit more damage, but it also lowers the enemy's defense for the following 7 seconds. Added with the invincibility, you can't really go wrong with picking this jutsu. Next up on the list is Wind Style Great Breach, which makes you shoot out a Windblast out of your mouth, dealing 30% damage to anyone caught. This is one of the simplest ranged jutsus in the game. It's very fast, deals good damage, and even goes through walls. Not to mention, it has really good range and can hit multiple people while also breaking guard and penetrating things like Sand Shield and Water Pillar. Just a really reliable technique. Continuing on is Chiku Sho, which first of all turns you invisible for 15 seconds. Apart from that, it also makes you invulnerable for 1 hit while you're invisible and boosts your attack too. You exit the invisibility if you attack, so the boost only lasts for 1 hit too. This is the ultimate surprise jutsu, as even though you're not completely invisible, it is pretty hard to see you, and most importantly, you cannot be locked onto. Secondly, the fact that you get an attack boost makes it so that you can create some combos that become more deadly with the use of Chiku Sho, or use it for ultimates that aren't 1-hit kills. Up next on our list we have Detonating Clay Twin Birds, which makes you create 2 birds made out of clay which track the opponent exploding upon impact, dealing around 40% damage in total. The birds are incredibly persistent in their pursuit, meaning that they will chase the enemy for quite a while before they disappear. Not to mention they deal a lot of damage for a range type, making this one of the best base game ranged jutsus in the game. Next in line is Iron Sand Unleashed, which makes you fire out an Iron Sand pyramid at the targeted enemy, dealing damage and poisoning them if it connects, while also creating an Iron Sand rectangle above their head. If you input the button again, the rectangle will explode into sand spikes, applying the same damage and effect as the first part. This is one of the best AoE attacks this class has to offer, as not only is it a great way to deal damage to everyone, but also a great way to poison them. Continuing with our list is Flying Raijin Slice, which makes you throw a kunai that after contact or 2 seconds you teleport to, slicing the target enemy and dropping them to their knees. Not only is this jutsu very fast and pretty easy to land, it also deals 1.5 times as much damage if the enemy is not locked onto you while you're performing this, which not only is a really cool gimmick but also very good as a surprise attack incentive. Let's move on to our next spot on the list, which is occupied by Camoi Ibond. This jutsu makes you invulnerable for the next 5 seconds as long as you're not attacking anyone, while also giving you an attack boost if you decide to do so. The main reason it's this high on the list is the fact that it's one of the best jutsus in the game for flag and base battle, for reasons I don't think I have to explain. Outside of those, it's kind of useless, but if you stick to the mentioned game modes, you should be able to make the most of it. Following on is Inferno style Flame Lighting, which is basically like a combination of Universal Pull and Amatarasu, as it pulls the enemy to you and then lights them up using the black flames, causing damage and the burn effect for the next 10 seconds. This jutsu is amazing for a flag battle, as the distance from which you can pull an enemy towards you that's stealing your flag is very large. It does have a pretty low cooldown of 18 seconds, but this jutsu will always be fun to use. Moving down the list is Windside Jutsu, which creates 4 small tornadoes that spread out, repeatedly damaging anyone if they step into it, and knocking them up into the air when they are done with them. This jutsu is amazing for team battles, as even though it may seem like the jutsu can be hard to hit, the opposite is true, as the small twisters cover quite an area, and it's by no means hard to hit multiple enemies. The damage in total is also not small, and even though the cooldown isn't the shortest, this jutsu is still definitely worth it. Next up on the list is Vanishing Rengan Full Moon, which makes you create a Rengan in your right hand that keeps getting bigger for as long as you hold down the jutsu button. Once you release the button, the Rengan will go after the targeted enemy, dealing damage on impact. This is an incredibly versatile ranged jutsu, as you can either charge it up to deal massive damage or fire it off quickly to finish off kills. It also gives you super armor while charging it, making it very hard to stop the attack once you get started. Next up on the list is Shado, which completely changes your base ninjutsu arsenal. The first ninjutsu you get is just a straight up rocket launcher, which deals a lot of damage but doesn't have any tracking. The second one is more akin to an overhead airstrike, raining down missiles on the opponent. The great thing about these jutsu is the fact that you can spam them without any cooldown, and added with the fact that they by no means deal small damage, makes this a very deadly jutsu for range types. Moving down the list we have Flash Slice. This attack makes you teleport above an enemy and slice them with your kunai, not only dealing damage but also bouncing them off the floor. This jutsu is not only a good way to get some good damage in, but also offers you a huge opportunity to continue comboing your enemy due to them bouncing off the ground, granting you the ability to deal huge damage with just one attack. And on the top of our list is the best fire jutsu in the game, Fire Style Majestic Destroyer Flame. This technique makes you create 6 huge fireballs bunched up together that target the enemy dealing 40% damage on impact, and inflict burn damage for the next 10 seconds. This is one of the easiest ways to do massive damage in the game, as it not only gives you super armor, but it is also incredibly hard to dodge. It does have a long cooldown, but it's still definitely worth it. Alright, that's every jutsu in the range class. Let me know what you guys think of the list. Obviously, a lot of my list is probably affected by my own bias, even though I tried to make it as accurate as possible. Nonetheless, it's definitely not perfect. That being said, if there's any part you didn't agree with, then let me know in the comments, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye everyone!